Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Ellison Barber in for Gadi. Schwartz coming to you from New York. Here are some of the stories we are watching tonight. Starting with a question. The last time Donald Trump got a target letter from the Justice Department, he was charged with 37 criminal counts. So what happens this time?
I got the letter on Sunday night. Think of it. I don't think they've ever sent a letter on Sunday night.
We don't know if or when Trump will be federally indicted for a second time, but we do have more details on what was in that letter saying he is a target of an investigation. Plus, the House Oversight Committee questions a pair of IRS agents about accusations of corruption surrounding a plea deal for the president's son.
And you are a criminal investigator. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct.
Not civil.
That is correct.
Thank you very much.
Record rainfall causes major flooding in Kentucky, and it's happening at a speed that's catching a number of residents by surprise.
A little bit of water. I was going to try to clean it up a little bit, and then it started gushing up through the toilets, started coming through the side walls, opened up the back door, and it started gushing inside the house.
And if you're already worried about losing your job to artificial intelligence, here's another reason to be a bit anxious.
Today, I go from just Ashley to AI Ashley on Live 95.5. So let's see how close the AI sounds to me. Today, I go from just Ashley to AI Ashley on Live 95.5. Let's see how close the AI sounds to me.
Tonight, new details are emerging about that target letter former President Donald Trump received from the Justice Department on Sunday night. We now know that the letter mentions these 3 federal statutes: deprivation of rights, conspiracy to defraud the U.S., and tampering with a witness. This is according to 2 attorneys with direct knowledge of the letter. We'll get into what each of those statutes mean in just a moment, but we do want to be clear. Just because the letter includes these statutes, that does not mean Trump will be charged with counts related to them necessarily. Whether a third possible indictment is on the way for the former president, we just don't know that yet. But we do know this is all connected to his alleged role in overturning the 2020 election and subsequently causing the January 6th riot. But President Trump himself thinks that an arrest and indictment are imminent. So let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas. Danny, let's start with these 3 statutes: deprivation of rights, conspiracy to defraud the U.S., and tampering with a witness. In normal people language, what does that mean?
Deprivation of rights is perhaps the most interesting. You ordinarily see that in the case where a police officer has a suspect. He bashes his head into a wall while he's arresting him, because that's under color of law. That's basically while wearing a badge or acting as an official, and you're depriving someone of their rights. And that's where you normally see that. How it will fit in here remains to be seen. Put those back up there so I can run through the list. The section conspiracy to defraud the United States, that is going to be any kind of defraud or a conspiracy to, and I expect that'll be the false slates of electors, the submitting these false slates. That is an alleged conspiracy, I would think, to defraud the United States. And of course, the tampering with a witness, I was just talking about this, that's a broader statute that is more of an obstruction statute. So this is more likely to be obstruction, although it could be possible it's going to be tampering with a witness. But that statute's a little confusing because it contains a number of subsections, and among them is obstruction of an official proceeding. I think that's more likely given these facts. But, I mean, I wouldn't rule out tampering with a witness. I just don't know who exactly that witness would be. Okay, so yeah, and we're trying to kind of read the tea leaves here as we get little bits of information, because grand juries, investigations like this, they're secretive by nature. But Donald Trump has said that he was told in that target letter that he had 4 days to appear before the grand jury. That was Sunday, so clock is kind of ticking on that. He doesn't necessarily have to go himself, right? A lawyer could go in his place. He should not go by himself. He should not go at all, because you don't want any chance that your client is going to open his mouth. There are 2 major distinctions I want to make here. Number one is that target letter almost certainly says, come on down, tell us your side of the story, or some version of that. Number one, if my client's a target, he will never, ever, 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 ever go in and sit down and talk to prosecutors. Because by definition, it means that they're informing my client he's a target. A target is defined as they have evidence, substantial evidence linking him to a crime. And the DOJ doesn't prosecute people willy-nilly. They investigate them for months or years until they're certain they have their case proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Then they send a target letter. What is my client going to do? Come in there and chit-chat his way out of being a target? I think not. I've heard a lot of former prosecutors say sometimes you could change prosecutors' minds. It's possible. I've just never heard of it actually happening.
All right. Danny Savalos, important context. Thank you. We appreciate it. Meanwhile, over on Capitol Hill today, 2 IRS whistleblowers testified before the House Oversight Committee about alleged meddling in the Department of Justice's investigation into Hunter Biden. The GOP-led panel saying the DOJ let Hunter Biden off easy.
These 2 courageous whistleblowers provided my committee with devastating testimony showing that the government is not treating all taxpayers equally, and the DOJ and the IRS gave preferential treatment to the president's son during a criminal investigation into his taxes.
At the center of it, U.S. Attorney for Delaware David Weiss, who the whistleblowers claim was not the deciding person in the case. Democrats, on the other hand, trying to discredit the 2 whistleblowers.
Mr. Weiss took a good hard look at those charges himself and ultimately decided not to charge them. Isn't that right, Mr. Shapley?
No, that's not supported by the facts.
Really? Well, which facts is it not supported by?
His own admissions in the October 7th, 2022 meeting that I documented contemporaneously, and the only piece of...
But he contradicts what you're saying.
Hunter Biden reached an agreement in the case back in June. He is expected to plead guilty to 2 federal misdemeanor counts for failing to pay taxes. He does still face a separate felony gun possession charge, which is likely to be dismissed. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins me now. Ryan, what else did we hear in the whistleblower testimony?
Well, we heard for more than 6 hours, Allison, these 2 IRS career public servants who testified under oath express a great deal of frustration by which they described as a very big pile of evidence that they said should have led to felony charges against the president's son, that they were either stymied or stood in the way of or just prevented from moving forward on. And they believe it is because of undue influence by the Biden administration over the prosecutors involved in this case. Now, it's worth pointing out that Democrats push back on those claims by saying that it's not really the decision of investigators to decide when something gets indicted. That's the responsibility of the prosecutors. And the lead prosecutor in this case, David Weiss, who you talked about before, was appointed by Donald Trump, and that the front part of this investigation took place while the Trump administration was still in charge. So the one thing I should point out, though, Allison, is that no one's questioning the credibility of these 2 men. No one thinks that they're lying. It's really just a fundamental difference of opinion as to what should have happened with that evidence that is really the issue that was talked about for quite a few hours today on Capitol Hill.
Ryan, is this something that the U.S. Congress would have jurisdiction over? Why did they decide to have this hearing right now?
So the Congress has oversight responsibility over all federal agencies. They are the power of the purse. They decide how much money each one of these federal agencies gets. So it is their responsibility to bring members of the administration through the various government agencies forward from time to time to look into things. Now, the Congress can really have a lot of discretion over exactly what they decide to have oversight into. And obviously, House Republicans have made it a priority to look into any potential accusation against the Biden administration and in particular the president himself. Their obsession with his son Hunter Biden has been well documented. They believe that this is fertile ground, and it does to a certain extent offer up a bit of cover and raise questions about the credibility of the various agencies that are also separately investigating the former president Donald Trump. So your question is a smart one. Is this something Congress needs to be dealing with? Obviously, Republicans think yes. Democrats believe it's a waste of time.
All right, Ryan Nobles, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Storms moving across the south today have brought massive flooding and a devastating tornado. Local officials say 2 people were hurt after that tornado tore a path nearly 20 miles long through Rocky Mount, North Carolina. It was more than 2.5 miles wide at some parts. Brian Varnell, whose family lives in the area where at least 3 homes were damaged, said he is thankful they're alive.
Well, they're shook up. They've never been through anything of this nature before, as most people in this area have it. We're used to more hurricanes or steady winds or small tornadoes during those time frames, but nothing of this scale.
This tornado packed winds over 150 miles per hour. Cars had windows blown out. Large buildings had roofs just blown off. A massive Pfizer plant also took a ton of damage. Amazingly, everyone there survived, and there are no reports of serious injuries. The State Department of Transportation says the storm even blocked Interstate 95 in both directions. To the west, in Ohio and Mississippi, River Valley's flash flooding has taken over communities. The governor of Kentucky has issued a state of emergency in the western part of that state. High waters moved fast enough to overtake homes and push massive trucks off of roads.
I've never seen the water get this bad, and I've never seen a vehicle go off the road in the water. But the water was going really swift and really, fast. It was a lot more of it.
A lot of this flooding happened in Mayfield and Graves County. Those areas are still recovering after devastating tornadoes hit just 2 years ago. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa is in Mayfield, Kentucky. Maggie, we mentioned the tornadoes from 2 years ago. I was in that community covering it, and the destruction was hard to wrap your head around even then. They still haven't fully recovered. When you combine that with what they're experiencing now, how are people managing to move on?
Yeah, I mean, they haven't even recovered, Ellison, physically or sort of as far as infrastructure goes, and then also emotionally. We just interviewed a woman, a mom of 5, and that was the first thing that she told us. She said, how can one community go through multiple disasters of this scale? Like, what are we supposed to do with this? And how are we supposed to explain it to our kids? That school behind me is her kid's school, and her daughter told me, it looks like my school is floating, and they have summer school right now. Tomorrow was supposed to be the last day, but now classes are canceled. Also, our affiliate spoke to a father of 5 who described what it was like. His name is Jeremy Martin. He described to the cameras what it was like when the flood water just came raging in early this morning. Take a listen.
Then it started gushing up through the toilets, started coming through the side walls, opened up the back door, and it started gushing inside the house. It was pretty bad.
Right. And then how high was the water?
Probably about to my knees inside the house. Mm-hmm. Outside the house, it was past my chest.
It was past his chest, and he actually told the reporter that when he first realized the floodwaters were coming in, he tried to go outside and run to a neighbor's house to warn them, but he says the water was so high, the current was so fast, he knew it was dangerous. He turned around, went back into his own home, and got his 5 kids, as well as his fiancée, out as fast as he could. And then again, we talked about the 2021 tornado. Ellison, you were here, December of 2021. More than 50 people died in that tornado. And the mom that we just talked to a few minutes ago told us among the dead were her kids' classmates. Mm-hmm. So the kids here, I mean, just if nothing else, have gone through so much in just a few short years. And just that it's really hard to explain to them how these disasters keep taking shape, basically, in their home. Ellison. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Maggie, it's hard to believe you are standing in front of a school because it looks like you're in the middle of a lake right now. How is Kentucky's government locally and also up at the state level? How are they responding to this?
Yeah, so the governor issued a state of emergency today, and that's kind of to be expected. We see that a lot in situations like this. And what that does essentially is it sort of streamlines the process for emergency funding, aid, that kind of thing, federal and state, to get to those who need it. It often sets up some kind of application process where people can identify homes that are damaged, buildings that are damaged, and get money to help them that much faster. It also sets up a mechanism to report price gouging in the area, whether it's hotel rooms or goods or services. Suddenly the price skyrockets because the need skyrockets, and that basically opens up an avenue to report that to the state, and then the state can turn around and penalize any retailers or providers who kind of engage in that awful behavior in times like this. So the governor warning people just to kind of be aware of those protections, use them if you need them, but also to be aware that another system is headed here tomorrow, another round of severe storms, possibly more flooding, possibly tornadoes, asking people to be aware of the weather forecast and to evacuate if those warnings do come through. Again, hard to think about, but a real concern here, Allison.
Yeah. Maggie Vespa, thank you so much for your reporting and bringing us those stories of the people there. Such an important reminder. We appreciate it. It is so hot in the Southwest that cities are breaking temperature records deep into the night. Today, Phoenix hit 117 during the day, but overnight, Sky Harbor Airport baked at a low of 97 degrees. That is the hottest nighttime temperature ever recorded there. Phoenix already smashed the record for the most number of back-to-back days hotter than 110 degrees, and they could keep breaking that record every day for the rest of the week. It was pretty much just as hot in Las Vegas today. For some people trying to get out of the city, their flight turned into an actual nightmare. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin has more on a plane stuck on the tarmac for 3 hours.
The deadly heat dome creating chaos at Harry Reid International in Las Vegas. Several passengers and a flight attendant exiting a Delta flight by stretcher after being stuck on the tarmac in unrelenting triple-digit heat for hours.
They were visibly shaking, like shaking.
The Robinson family was on the flight with their 1-year-old baby when they saw fellow passengers become ill.
It looked like their cognitive skills were in decline, eyes rolling in the back of the head.
And doctors say that's the sign of potentially deadly danger.
When you're confused, we know that you have a heat stroke.
Delta has apologized for the incident and says it's investigating the matter. This is the Valley of the Sun breaks yet another all-time record with an overnight low of 97 degrees, the hottest it's ever been when the sun's down. Phoenix going on 3 weeks of temps 110 plus. Experts say the city's sprawling concrete is partly to blame as it stops urban areas from cooling down. Tonight across the country, 77 million people are under heat alerts. And it's not just humans who are suffering. At the Phoenix Zoo, it's all hands on deck to make sure the animals are comfortable and cool.
They're not quite used to these temperatures, and we're constantly monitoring them.
Tonight, it's the dog days of summer with no end in sight.
NBC's Aaron McLaughlin, thank you. Coming up, new details on the U.S. soldier that ran into North Korea. We have the bizarre story of how he even managed to get to the border in the first place.
At first I thought, like, what is going on? This must be some kind of joke.
Welcome back. Here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. A criminal investigation is looking into how a building collapsed in Davenport, Iowa back in May, killing 3 people. The criminal inquiry is not the only investigation. The city of Davenport has hired a third-party firm. Survivors in civil lawsuits have also brought in their own investigators. The president of Stanford University is resigning after an investigation into his past research. It found that members of Mark Tesser-Levine's team manipulated data. The board says he did not correct these mistakes in the research, but did not accuse him of fraud. New legal battles have begun around hazing allegations at Northwestern University. Former Wildcats football players have accused the former coach and team leaders of turning a blind eye to the abuse. A former quarterback spoke out today.
Upon arrival to campus, we were thrown into a culture where physical, emotional, and sexual abuse was normalized.
The football coach, Pat Fitzgerald, was fired for his apparent inaction. And feeling lucky, the Powerball jackpot is now over $1 billion. Tonight's drawing is just the 3rd time the jackpot has hit the $1 billion mark. Odds of winning are about 1 in 292 million. So good luck. Tonight, we're learning new details about the American soldier detained in North Korea. 23-year-old Travis King has been in the Army for about 2.5 years. The Defense Department says he was being sent home from South Korea when he blended in with a group of tourists and then bolted across the border. Here's how one tourist described the scene.
At first I thought, like, what is going on? This must be some kind of joke. Maybe he has a friend who's filming it for TikTok, and I just thought that was, you know, the stupidest thing on earth. And then he didn't stop, and then about that time, one of the American soldiers shouted, "Get him," and the American and South Korean soldiers chased after him.
NBC's Matt Bradley has more.
Yeah, we're getting a clearer picture of that young private second-class Travis King, who just yesterday set off a massive diplomatic crisis when he bolted across the border, the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea, apparently, according to the White House and the U.S. government, on his own volition. He did this just entirely spontaneously. Now, I spoke with somebody who was there on the tour, and there are guided tours that go regularly. They leave from here in Seoul, the capital of South Korea, and take tourists all the way up to that border and show them around, and that's exactly how he got there. She said that he was, not really speaking with people. He bought a hat at the gift shop. He was on his own, and then all of a sudden, he broke free from the crowd, tried to make it across the border. Some of the border guards, there were more than a dozen of them, South Korean and Americans, made haste and tried to tackle him, but they weren't able to reach him before he ran all the way across the border. Now, she said that she was actually afraid for her life. She didn't know if the North Koreans would return fire, if there'd be some kind of dramatic incident that occurred between both sides. This is still very much a tense border, and it has been for decades. She was ushered in with the rest of her tour into safety and then eventually told, very urgently, to leave the border area. Now, we just got word just a couple of hours ago that all tours to the border, the same kind that Private King took, are now suspended, as they were through most of the pandemic. But this is an incident that could still have effects. We're seeing at this very moment some of the worst tensions between America and South Korea that we've seen in recent memory. And just a day after this incident happened, the North Koreans fired 2 ballistic missiles toward Japan. They landed in the ocean and didn't hurt anybody. But it just goes to show this incident, those ballistic missiles, were probably a protest from a ballistic missile-armed submarine that was docked in South Korea for the first time again in decades. So we're seeing a ratcheting up of tensions between the U.S. and South Korea. Really, this was not a good time for this young private to decide to make a dash for the North Koreans.
Matt Bradley in South Korea, thank you. A deadly shooting in New Zealand just as the country is hours away from hosting the Women's World Cup. At least 2 people were killed. The gunman is also dead. Right now, it is not clear if he was shot by police or if he turned that weapon on himself. It all happened in the largest city of the country, Auckland. NBC's Josh Letterman has more.
This incident started at about 7:20 in the morning in New Zealand, where it is now Thursday morning, when police say that a gunman opened fire inside of a building that was under construction. He then proceeded to move throughout the building to the upper floors, continuing to shoot his gun. And when police responded, they say they found him barricaded inside of an elevator shaft on one of the upper floors. Police saying that they tried to engage this suspect, but he continued shooting. And a short time later, the police found him dead. Now, as of now, the police are not specifying whether it was an officer who shot the suspect and killed him or whether the suspect might have shot himself. But we do know that in addition to those who have died as a result of this shooting, there are several more who are injured, some of them seriously. And we are also told by police that this is not a national security risk. They see this as an isolated incident. And in fact, this building was not anywhere near any of the stadiums that are involved in the Women's World Cup. And so this does not appear at this point to be tied in any way to that sporting event. In fact, we're hearing from U.S. Soccer saying that all of the members of the American team have been accounted for, are safe, were not harmed in this incident. But it comes in a country that doesn't get a lot of mass shootings. In fact, the big one we all remember back in 2019 when 51 people were killed at that mosque in Christchurch. In the wake of that incident, New Zealand really stepped up their efforts to restrict the ability for people to get guns. This is one more incident showing that this is still an issue facing New Zealand and the rest of the world.
NBC's Josh Letterman, thank you. Coming up, what police are now saying about a woman in Alabama who went missing for 48 hours, including some questionable internet searches that were found on her phone. But first, you gotta see this. One woman says she is appalled after she and her friends were called out by Miranda Lambert for taking a selfie during a concert.
I'm gonna stop right here for a sec, Danny. I'm sorry. These girls are worried about their selfie and not listening to the song. It's pissing me off a little bit.
The fan, who is a social media influencer, posted these group photos to Instagram where people are debating if Lambert's reaction was justified. Representatives for the country star have declined to comment, so it looks like it is up to the internet to decide. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. The soldier who bolted over the North Korean border was being sent back to the U.S. for possible disciplinary reasons. Officials say he blended in with a group of tourists and then ran across. Parts of Kentucky are underwater after being drenched with nearly a foot of rain since this morning. And people on a Delta flight got sick after sitting on a hot plane on the tarmac in Las Vegas for hours. One flight attendant even had to go to the hospital. Lots of new details tonight about the disappearance of an Alabama woman named Carly Russell. She went missing last week after calling 911, saying that she saw a toddler walking along the side of the road. Today, police released that 911 call.
Was the child on the left or right side? On the right side. Were they walking northbound or southbound? They're walking towards Tuscaloosa. Walking southbound? Or how old they look? Like a toddler, maybe 3 or 4. What's your name? My name is Carly Russell.
Investigators claim they still have no proof of any missing toddler. They also say they don't have any reports from any other drivers describing a similar scene. This is the timeline of Carly's disappearance as we know it. Last Thursday, around 8:30 p.m., she left work in Birmingham, Alabama. Then she stopped to get food and pick up snacks at Target. She then calls 911 about this toddler. An hour after that call, police arrive at the scene, find Carly's car, some of her belongings, but no Carly. A statewide search begins, and 2 days later, on Saturday, they get a call from Carly's home, and police are told she has returned. Let's bring in NBC News correspondent Sam Brock. Sam, what else did we learn from police today? They said something about a bunch of internet searches where they suspect might be relevant in this case. What's going on there?
Yeah, so Allison, big picture. Police did not come out and overtly say there was no toddler and there was no abduction, but they did their darndest to paint a picture of why they think there's a lot of holes in that sort of narrative. And one of them, as you suggest, are these internet searches. And we're not talking weeks in advance of Carly's disappearance. In the days, 2 or 3 days, and even the day of when she disappeared, she was searching for things on the internet that would probably raise some eyebrows for investigators, certainly, or anyone for that matter, in the prism of what's happened. Take a listen.
Part of what data includes several internet searches in the days leading up to their disappearance. The term, do you have to pay for an Amber Alert was searched. The day of her disappearance, the term, how to take money from a register without being caught was searched. A search for the movie Taken, a film about abduction, was conducted.
And so the police chief, Ellison, went on to say there were actually more searches that would potentially be damning in this case, but they wanted to respect her privacy. He was also asked whether or not they're considering charges against Carly. He said they had not even thought about that at this point.
Sam, are police saying anything about Carly's history? Have they talked about whether or not there have been any sort of false calls in the past or mental illness possibly being involved here?
Gosh, that is such an interesting question, right? Because your mind, unfortunately, goes there when police are telling you there is no predator, there is no public safety threat out there. So was this a mental health episode? I actually asked the police chief that very question. Do you have anything in her history that would indicate there was some sort of mental health struggles? He said, not that we're aware of. The part of the process now of this investigation is not just going through her phone, we believe, to try to mine more information, but also to speak with coworkers, loved ones, to find out maybe what was going on in her life at that point in time. We're actually going to be interviewing her boss, the owner of the business that she worked at later this evening. So hopefully there'll be some more answers on that down the road.
So where do things go from here, Sam, if police are saying they don't think they're going to pursue any other charges? They're wanting to balance her privacy rights here. But obviously in that community, a lot of people have questions. Do we know anything even about her condition tonight?
Right, to put it mildly. As far as her condition is concerned, we can only go off of what Carly's parents have said, which is there were highs, there were lows. She's doing okay with loved ones right now, but the first day back, she asked if she could sleep in their room because she was just cringing thinking about her experiences. Where do we go from here? There's still this vacuum, Ellison, of 48 hours where people have no idea where she actually went. Police did mention today it is an active investigation. You know they're going to try to get to the bottom of this, but right now, by their own admission, they have no idea what happened or where she went.
So many unanswered questions. Sam Brock, thank you. We appreciate your reporting.
Thanks, Allison.
It was an emotional day of testimony inside a Texas court today, where women challenging the state's 6-week abortion ban shared their own experiences of being denied an abortion despite having medical complications. Among them, Ashley Brandt. She said she had to travel out of state after learning one of her twins was unviable and could risk the life of her other child. Listen.
I would have had to watch twin A, Isla, deteriorate more and more every ultrasound. Sorry. I would have had to give birth to an identical version of my daughter without a skull and without a brain. And I would have had to hold her until she died.
Texas currently has one of the strictest bans in the country, only allowing for abortions in circumstances when the life of the mother is at risk. But the women in this lawsuit allege that law is much too vague and say it failed to protect them. NBC's Lindsay Reiser is following this story closely for us. Hey, Lindsay.
Hi there. Well, it was an emotional day of testimony in an Austin courtroom today. We have about 15 plaintiffs who filed a lawsuit with the Center for Reproductive Rights in March against the state of Texas and their 6-week abortion ban. And according to the ban, there is an exception for the pregnant person if their life is at risk. But some people are saying that the wording is too vague and doctors are afraid to perform abortion care even in those dire circumstances. They risk losing their medical license. They can face up to a $100,000 fine, even up to 99 years in jail if they are found to violate this law. So we're going to put up some names here of the 5 plaintiffs that we're going to hear from in these 2 days of testimony. One mother gave an incredibly detailed, emotional, even graphic description of what happened. While she was pregnant, she was told that her pregnancy was not viable, that her baby had a 0% chance of surviving because the baby's head, skull, and brain weren't fully formed. This is what she told the courtroom.
She told me that I didn't have any options because there was a law that the Texas abortion law prohibited it. I wasn't able to get one. So I felt like I was abandoned. I felt like I didn't know how to deal with the situation.
She also couldn't travel out of state to get abortion care because she couldn't afford it and had to care for small children. So she said that she carried the baby to term. When she gave birth, the baby was still alive, but then the baby, who they ended up naming Halo, ended up dying about 4 hours after her birth. So just incredibly gut-wrenching testimony today. On the state side, we're going to show you some of the state's arguments and their opening arguments, and they say that the plaintiffs are on an ideological crusade here, that the purpose of the courts is not to legislate. They also say any future harm they're talking about is hypothetical, and that what happened to these plaintiffs, albeit incredibly tragic, was in the past. They also say the blame is being directed at the defendants and that it is misplaced. They actually blame the medical providers. Now, the judge in this case is going to decide on whether to place a hold on this abortion ban as it relates to these dire circumstances here that would apply in these dangerous situations, or to dismiss the lawsuit altogether. Back to you.
Lindsay Reiser, thank you. There's a painful tale of deception out of Yale we need to tell you about. A nurse at the Yale fertility clinic was swapping pain meds. To be specific, she was stealing fentanyl and swapping it out with saline, leaving hundreds of women alert during extremely invasive procedures. NBC's Kaylee Hartung shares their stories.
In 2020, dozens of women trusted Yale University's fertility clinic to help them through the emotionally and physically demanding process of trying to get pregnant or freeze their eggs. But during the fairly common procedure to retrieve the eggs, something went horribly wrong for these women. When the truth came to light, everyone was shocked. It's now the subject of a new podcast by the New York Times, and now some of those women are speaking out with us.
It was just really hard. And you never think you're going to be a victim of something like that.
For Victoria Seidel and dozens of other women like her, dreaming of motherhood, a routine surgical procedure to retrieve their eggs was supposed to be straightforward.
They tell you it's non-invasive, and all you are thinking about in that moment is how many eggs did we get?
Especially since, after careful research and doctors' referrals, they chose to freeze their eggs or undergo in vitro fertilization at Yale University's Fertility Center.
It took a toll, but it's Yale. I was going to make it work.
But as a federal investigation later discovered, a nurse at the clinic stole hundreds of vials of fentanyl for her own use over a 5-month period in 2020, replacing the powerful medication with saline solution. That pain medicine that was supposed to provide comfort to women during the egg extraction. Instead, both during and after their procedures, the women describe being in excruciating pain.
It's just like this stabbing internal pain that no one should ever feel, ever.
When an anesthesiologist noticed how easily a cap popped off one fentanyl vial, the nurse's crime was uncovered. In 2021, Donna Montecone pled guilty to federal charges of tampering with a consumer product. She surrendered her nursing license and was sentenced to 4 weekends in prison, plus 3 months of home confinement. The case is now the subject of a podcast by the New York Times.
This is the retrievals.
Yale agreed to pay more than $300,000 to the Department of Justice to resolve allegations of violations of the Controlled Substances Act. Now 68 victims, including Victoria, Angela, and Laura Czar, are suing Yale, accusing it of failing to properly safeguard its supply of fentanyl.
At the end of the day, I hold Yale responsible because this never should have happened.
A spokesperson for the university says Yale deeply regrets the distress suffered by some of its patients, adding the center also reviewed its procedures and made changes to further oversight of pain control and controlled substances.
This is something that has changed me and my family's life forever.
And as it happens, I've undergone this very procedure. I froze my eggs back in 2021, not long after these women had their deeply traumatic experiences. So this really hits close to home for me. When I went through this process, I worried about a lot of things, but the actual procedure, experiencing this level of pain they described, was not one of them. The women I spoke to all agreed the takeaway here is to listen to your body. If something doesn't feel right, do not hesitate to speak up, and definitely don't blame yourself. Back to you.
Kaylee Hartung, thank you. When we come back, hundreds of migrants, including kids, abandoned in a tractor trailer. A look at the horrific treatment of migrants and what's being done about it. Let's take a quick look around the world in 80 seconds. Protests continue in Israel over Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to limit the power of the country's Supreme Court. The mass demonstrations have been going on for nearly 7 months now, but these most recent protests come just 1 week before Netanyahu's plan to finalize the law. A fire broke out at a military training ground in Russian-occupied Crimea today. Thousands of people were forced to evacuate and a major highway was shut down. Russian officials say they're still investigating what caused the fire. Ukraine has not claimed any responsibility. The continued heat wave in Italy is now responsible for more than a quarter of all hospital visits. This, according to the Italian Society of Emergency Medicine. And now COVID-style protocols are being rolled out to protect some hospitals from being overcrowded. And in China, a new fossil reveals there's a lot to learn about the food chain millions of years ago. It depicts a badger-like mammal about the size of a house cat attacking a small dinosaur about the size of a border collie. The two creatures roamed the earth 125 million years ago, and this finding suggests that some mammals preyed on dinosaurs. The conditions facing migrants continue to be in the spotlight. Yesterday, we told you about the allegations of inhumane treatment at the border made by a Texas state trooper. Now, Mexican authorities recently revealed that roughly 500 migrants were abandoned in a tractor trailer just south of the border. Here's the latest. Nearly 500 migrants, adults and young children, are lucky to be alive after smugglers abandoned them in a tractor trailer. Mexican authorities rescued nearly 300 in one operation over the weekend as the nation tries to crack down on smugglers transporting migrants to the United States in dangerous conditions. Just a day later, Mexican authorities say they intercepted another 200 migrants in the back of an abandoned truck, potentially drugged. Bracelets were reportedly wrapped around their arms to identify them, and they were crammed in a trailer box that was adapted to avoid X-ray detection. This year alone, border agents in the Rio Grande Valley sector say they've intercepted more than 100 trucks illegally transporting migrants. And while the risk some are taking remains high, the latest Border Patrol numbers show the number of crossings going down. This man left Colombia last year, but he says the journey here paled in comparison to what he experienced in U.S. custody.
Yo duré 5 días en ese centro de detención, donde no te puedes ni bañar, los baños en una sola cisterna.
He asked us to conceal his identity, alter his voice, and use the pseudonym Sebastián, because his immigration case is still pending and he fears retaliation. Sebastián was sent to an ICE detention center in Louisiana and was subjected to conditions advocates describe as horrific and inhumane.
Did you ever fear for your life? ¿Temías por tu vida ahí?
Sí, yo creo muchas. O sea, hay veces que el encierro es tal que no te dan esperanza de nada.
In exclusive interviews with NBC News, people who are or were detained at the Wynn Correctional Center describe how they were given undrinkable water, constantly threatened with solitary confinement, and barely given access to doctors, even in dire situations.
The contract for Wynn Correctional expires in May 2024. The answer is simply to not renew it. That facility cannot be reformed.
In a statement provided to NBC News, a spokesperson for ICE said the agency, quote, provides comprehensive policy and strict oversight for the administrative custody of one of the most transient, diverse populations of any correctional or detention system in the world, and holds firm to continuous review of the many factors relevant to the continued operation of each of its facilities.
I think the thing that makes me most heartbroken for people like Sebastián is that they come here and they absolutely believe what the American people believe, which is that the United States is a beacon of hope. And they never anticipated that they would come to the U.S. and be thrown into a jail.
So here's the thing. Complaints about the conditions at Wynn Correctional Center in Louisiana, they're not new. In March of 2022, ICE announced plans to limit the use of Wynn and 2 other facilities. And they did that in part because an internal investigative group, the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties for ICE, investigated and said that until they made big changes in terms of safety at this facility, they should drop down the number of detainees there to 0. But advocates say since all of that, absolutely nothing has changed from what they've seen. They say the Biden administration could decide not to renew this contract. It's a private for-profit company that runs this facility. And in their opinion, they say that is the only option moving forward. Advocates say part of the problem here is that this is run by a private for-profit company. All right, before we go, if you knew your home would be underwater eventually, would you still buy it? It sounds like a no-brainer, but even with climate change and rising waters, some coastal communities are still booming.
We're more concerned our sailboat sinking than we are the island. I don't think we're going to be around when the island's sunk.
We've all heard how global warming is directly impacting rising sea levels and in turn could greatly affect coastal communities. When it comes to one very tiny community in Maryland, experts say rising sea levels will make most of the area unlivable in just a couple of decades. But that threat is not entirely turning away homebuyers. Some say it is well worth the risk. NBC's Aaron Gilchrist has the story of Smith Island.
A 15-mile choppy boat ride from Maryland's western shore, past a shipwreck
there is a refuge in the Chesapeake Bay, Smith Island. Its fewer than 200 full-time residents carry more than 300 years of the island's unique culture. It's home to Maryland's state dessert, Smith Island layer cake, a vibrant crabbing tradition, and more recently, a swarm of home buyers.
It's been over 30 homes in 2 years.
Smith Island's jack-of-all-trades, new and only realtor Laura Evans says she's never seen anything like it.
So this is one of the listings that I've just recently received.
It's on the market for about $160,000, up 28% from the last time it sold 17 years ago. Compared to the mainland, the homes offer a bargain for those seeking a slower lifestyle.
I think that the attraction is people just want to escape.
All the new home buyers may seem peculiar because scientists project global warming will plunge Smith Island almost entirely underwater with just 1 foot of sea level rise by 2050. New home buyers on the island, though, will tell you that there is something special about Smith Island that makes them want to stay.
I've never had neighbors like it, people who just open their arms to welcome us here.
Paul and Samantha Brillinger bought a fixer-upper for $80,000 in March. They say rising sea levels are a common issue for anybody living on the coast.
We're more concerned our sailboat sinking than we are the island. I don't think we're going to be around when the island sunk.
While environmental issues have forced insurers to pull out of states like California and Florida, Paul and Samantha say they had no trouble getting home and flood insurance for about $2,800 a year. For generations, residents here have found ways to cope with a bay that has reclaimed more than 3,000 acres of the island in the past 150 years.
They're the canary in the coal mine when it comes to climate change and sea level rise in Chesapeake Bay.
Back on Maryland's eastern shore,
what was solid land here is falling straight in the water, and that's like 6 feet down.
Professor Bill Dennison says climate change is already fueling erosion and shore loss across the Chesapeake. In 2013, after damage from Hurricane Sandy, the state of Maryland offered a home buyout program to Smith Island residents, sparking a backlash.
We're not going anywhere. We're here to stay.
Crabber Mark Kitching has lived on the island his whole life.
We started seeking funding through, whatever agencies were available to us.
Since then, Smith Island has received millions of government dollars for new elevated roads, a sewer plant, a jetty, and dock repairs. And now the state's buyback program is history. Still, some on the island harbor climate skepticism. To the folks who say in another 30 years, 50 years, Smith Island won't be inhabitable, what do you say to those people?
I think their numbers is skewed.
For Smith Islanders old and new, the future has always been uncertain. They say what's important is preserving their little slice of heaven on earth and the rock-solid community that comes with it.
Aaron Gilchrist joins us now. Aaron, since residents on the island are not rushing to leave, are they taking any steps to deal with the rising sea level and try and protect that community?
Yeah, absolutely. The people who live on Smith Island will tell you that they have a problem with erosion. They have a problem with flooding. There is not necessarily a sea level rise issue there. And so the county, the state of Maryland, the federal government over the years have spent money on building seawalls and things of that sort, trying to raise the roads across parts of the island, trying to make it more livable just a little bit longer than maybe the projections would indicate at this point. But ultimately, sea level rise is something that this island is going to have to deal with. And at some point, people won't be able to handle it.
A fascinating report, Aaron Gilchrist. Thank you so much. And finally tonight, in the future of everything, in AI DJ, a radio station in Portland, Oregon is using voice cloning and artificial intelligence to create a DJ for its midday show. Thomas Schultz from our NBC affiliate KGW introduces us.
Hey Portland, it's AI Ashley on Live 95.5.
Many listeners of Live 95.5 may not notice the change, but a new voice made its debut over the airwaves on June 13th, and it sounds remarkably similar to radio host Ashley Z.
Today I go from just Ashley to AI Ashley on Live 95.5. So let's see how close the AI sounds to me. Today, I go from just Ashley to AI Ashley on Live 95.5. Let's see how close the AI sounds to me.
Elzinga says it took months to develop AI Ashley before she made her debut earlier this month. Content director Dylan Salisbury says AI Ashley can update Portlanders on major news in the area at any time of day. Elzinga, who is based in Traverse City, Michigan, can't do that. Salisbury says the goal isn't to replace Elzinga as DJ, but to use AI Ashley as an alter ego to the host.
We really like the idea of kind of an angel and devil, an Eminem and Slim Shady kind of dynamic between the two.
Even host Ashley Z hears her own Midwestern accent in the AI version of herself.
That sounds like me. I guess I have the day off.
Days off are something some experts worry about.
Companies will eliminate jobs with AI if they can.
Carrie Tomlinson is a cyber news reporter. She says AI is estimated to destroy 300 million jobs worldwide.
For any human being, it is scary to know that the job that you're doing, especially if you enjoy it, could be eliminated.
But Tomlinson says AI can create innovative ideas that benefit the world. Portland State computer engineering professor Christoph Tuscher says AI will change the way people work.
It's a tool for me, and I think it's a bit like a hammer, right? You can use it for good or for bad.
He says the technology should be embraced, albeit with more regulation. But so far, Tuscher says U.S. regulation lags behind Europe. In a national artificial intelligence plan released by the White House in May, the report states an expansive AI research and development program is needed to ensure AI is used ethically and legally. Tuscher says that's because AI isn't going away.
It's impossible to sort of stop.
As regulation evolves, Elzinga stresses the unique possibilities of AI.
There are good people who are working really, really hard on this new and fresh thing who do not mean to use it for bad. We want to use it for good. And this can be fun. This can be exciting.
In Portland, Thomas Schultz, KGW News.
That does it for us tonight. I'm Ellison Barber. We'll see you tomorrow. But until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.